Hello to all. Hola, Neil. How are
Hi,
you?
how are you?
I am very good. Neil, let me tell you a story. December the 1st, Pecino GP made 1 year.
Cool.
And we made a survey about what our followers like more and this and that. And basically, for my surprise, they mostly like the tech areas. And some of them mentioned you.
Oh, that's a bit scary.
So, are you publishing somewhere? Are you having a YouTube channel? Because people know you, and I'm talking about people from North America, from South America, from everywhere.
Yeah, I decided. Uh, I wrote a book in 2017.
Yes.
The project is nearly complete now, and I did it because I knew it was time to stop. For me, I had done 17 years flying all over the world as a freelancer, and you know the financial challenge.
Yes, very well.
You have to earn quite a lot of money just to be there. And what was obvious to me is that MotoGP was putting together its own team of technical people in pit lane. And these guys are flown in, they have their accommodation paid for, they have a salary, and all they have to do is spot stuff and talk about it on the TV. I simply can't compete against that. I still like it. I'm still involved in motorcycle racing, but in the UK. But there is a time for business, and there is a time where you have to be honest with yourself and say, why am I doing this? So I decided to stop. Don't get me wrong. I still enjoy the technology. I still enjoy understanding how the motorcycles work. But you have to be honest with yourself and say, why am I working stupid hours? Rather a nice story.
For almost nothing.
Yeah, basically. So it was, I'm massively honored to have had the opportunity and to enjoy it, but also it was, I was lucky with the timing of the start at the start of MotoGP, but you have to know when to start, but you also have to know when to finish.
Yeah, but I am curious because I'm still there and I haven't found the people that are doing your job. But after the video, you tell me who they are because I haven't found them yet.
Okay, we'll have that chat. I mean, it's possible that some format like this might be better and easier. But I think I have to get into pit lane a bit more often to truly understand what people are doing.
Okay, so let's start. Look, my first question or topic is about as a technical observer. How do you assess the 2023 season?
2023.
Yes. Has there been anything interesting that has excited you?
I'm not sure I'd say excited. I am fascinated by the growth in aero and the growth of ride height adjustment, especially let's call it mobile ride height adjustment. And I'm fascinated by the riders that are able to deal with all these variables and still race. I mean, it's an amazing. I mean, they must have brains twice the size of Rossi's to do what they're doing. You know, there's so much timing involved and accuracy, and at the same time, they're achieving new levels of lean. I mean, what's Jorge Martin up to now? 66 degrees.
It's incredible. He is going to touch with the helmet the next thing.
Yeah. Well, he's wearing his shoulders out. I mean, this is crazy. It's fantastic.
But is it really needed, or is it part of the show? That's a question mark.
Yeah, this is my trouble. When I come and if I really sit down and think about it, I enjoy seeing 2 people, 3 people close together, touching fairings, sticking their elbows out, and having a fight on motorcycles. So a proper race at close quarters. And I think with the aerodynamics, we are seeing bikes pushed apart. And with the ride height equipment and everything else, it's nice to go faster. But do we need to go faster to have a good show. And I think we've gone a bit too far. About 4 or 5 years ago, MotoGP was perfect. But somewhere in the last 3 or 4 years, we are starting to suffer from the wrong side of aerodynamics. Bikes are too far apart. And the complexity of the ride height adjustment, I mean, it's great technology. I'm supposed to love that. But it's just a bit much. A bit much.
Do you think that the engineers have conquered the racing? I mean, conquered the engineers were always there, right? But
Yeah.
do you think that their influence has been too big, has grown too much?
Possibly. First things first, you have to take your hat off to them for thinking through the things they've thought through and for making them work. Our rule book doesn't make these technologies easy to use. So 10 out of 10. I'm particularly impressed by Ducati. I said for years that until they were as good as the Japanese, they shouldn't try and think of new things to do. And for many years, they were trying to think of new things before they got the basis right. But around the time of Lorenzo and Dovi, they had got the basics absolutely right. And since then, all they've done is add greater and greater ideas. And it's fantastic. I mean, it really is wonderful. But it isn't a show. I need different factories fighting over things, and I need different colors and different strategies, and that's not happening. Plus, I see some things. Aprilia, I think, are the most noticeable for this, where engineers are being recruited from outside motorcycling.
Correct.
So I'm told the Aprilia gets pretty hot. And I can guess why this has happened, because somebody has sat down and said, well, if we let the engine run hotter, and you do that by increasing the pressure of the cooling system, we can run a smaller radiator, which is more efficient, and we can get better aerodynamics with this. But somebody forgot to tell whoever thought of that, the rider is cuddling the machine.
Yeah, there is somebody sitting on that machine.
He's wrapped around it. And suddenly you've gone from 100 degrees to 130, 140 degrees. And there is a point at which the rider doesn't like that. You know, so I guess different people are learning different lessons, but there's one or two where you think, guys, can we just sit down and have a chat about this? You know, maybe we need to have a new rule for maximum temperature of the motorcycle. I know that would go down badly with all the people who hate tire pressure rules, but it would probably be quite nice to the riders.
This what you said matches perfectly with what Romano has explained me more than once, that in their case, Neil, they started to build the bike from the aerodynamic they designed, and then they started to build the bike, the rest. Not like Honda, who starts with an engine and then builds the rest, or Yamaha, who starts with a chassis. No, they started from the aero design. It's what you say, it matches perfectly.
Yeah, well, I'm not surprised. I think they brought in some guys from Ferrari and things like this. Yeah. And, you know, we have other influences here. The greatest improvement or the greatest change in motorcycle aerodynamics is probably brought about by the Formula One cost rule, where they have a cap on how much money they can spend. And they've got all these guys. Well, what do? You need to keep the good guys, but with the cost cap, you can't keep them all the time. So if we can find another project for them to do, we keep the good guys in Formula One for when we want them for Formula One, and we've found another place to use their skills. I mean, the same thing probably caused Ferrari to go world sports car racing. You know, it's an interesting spin-off from various things.
Yeah, interesting point of view. Another thing, as an expert in starts, because you run a clutch business, what exactly did Aprilia use for 2 races when they got banned? You know, after 2 races, suddenly Maverick Viñales said, we won't start as well as we did in the previous races because what we used has been banned. Can you explain us what was this?
I heard about this. I've not seen the mechanism. Yeah, we're not allowed to have electronic assistance to the riders. So I don't know how the device works, but I think there was a device that was designed to engage the clutch in the perfect timescale. So instead of the rider just feeding the clutch out as he goes off the line and letting the thing go, they had a mechanism that did that at the perfect speed. I think the nearest that's probably around at the moment, Honda launched a new motorcycle at the recent motorcycle shows, which has an electronic controlled clutch. So you can have a manual gearbox, but every time you change gear, it declutches electronically, so you don't need to learn to use the clutch. It would be something similar to this, but for competition use. I can only imagine it was clockwork or something. It was something that worked once. You only need it to work. There's only one start. But I would imagine it's something that phased out the clutch. But I think Ducati had something similar. I'm fairly sure Ducati.
I know that Aprilia for sure, and I think also KTM. But my question is it easy to see from the pit wall that they are using a system like this?
It depends how you trigger it. I would imagine there must be something that you press a button that says, okay, on this use of the clutch lever, the automatic mechanism works. So maybe you build up the engine, then you let go of the clutch lever, and when the light changed, and then it lets the clutch out gently and accurately. I'd imagine Jorge Martin could have used it in the last but one race in Malaysia. Something definitely went wrong there.
Yeah, but I ask you because it was another brand that, how do you say that, said to the IRTA or whoever, look, they are using this. So somebody must have noticed, watching from outside, that something like this was happening.
Yes, I mean, if you're in the factory team, you know how fast your riders can do things, and you know what to expect from watching all the previous starts. And if something suddenly changes, something's changed. If the clutch is hydraulic, you could hide a mechanism anywhere between the handlebar and the clutch on the side of the bike. And to be honest, if it's cable, you could do the same. So it's not necessarily going to be obvious on the outside. I mean, I have got old motorcycles where the clutch adjustment is in the middle of the cable. So you could just build it in. So it worked once, but it's how do you trigger it is the interesting question. How do you tell it, this one is for the launch?
But it seems that it was quite efficient. It worked because suddenly the Aprilias were starting incredible. Then they went back to the previous phase.
Well, it's not. I mean, starts aren't really Maverick's thing, are they?
Especially Maverick. Yes, it's not the best example.
Well, I can imagine he really enjoyed it. It's also quite interesting, though, that another manufacturer had to say, "Is this legal?" And it doesn't say that. It does make you wonder if the technical inspection side is as good as it could be.
Of course, yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's a rule. It says what you can do. And if you're a technical inspector, you must be taking things apart off some of the bikes at the end of the race. And there's two levels to that. One is that they clearly didn't spot it, but the second, that word has got out that they had to be told to spot it.
Yeah, but you have been around. Do the bikes be checked after the race? I've never seen that.
Yeah, the top three are usually checked in some way. They'll usually choose one particular thing. They'll check. They'll look at the fuel, make sure it's the right type of fuel, always assuming there's enough left, and they can weigh them. If they want to, they can say, okay, now take the cover off the fuel tank area and take the fuel tank out. Let's have a look, just see what's there. And if they really want to, they could take the cylinder head off. I mean, they can do whatever they like. They don't do it often, but they should be doing it enough not to need someone to say, "Oi,
yeah,
you've forgotten something. You've missed something."
You have forgotten something. Yes.
Yes.
Another topic, Neil. you have been the witness of how Dalinia has been building up his now perfect Desmosetici.
He's done a very good job.
Are you surprised about what he has reached? Or did you see it coming?
I didn't see it coming to this level. I mean, absolutely. Gigi is an absolute perfectionist. He's a genius. For many years, I've written rules for race series. And one of the things he is a genius at is reading the rule book. Most people read a rule book and say, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't do this. And that's how somebody usually writes a rule book. And Gigi takes the same rule book and looks at it and says, oh, look, now I can do that, I can do this. It sees it the other way around.
Yes, true.
I have to admire that ability. That's fantastic. You know, if you look at the construction of the Ducati, there are so many unique things. I can remember talking to Gigi when he was running the Aprilia World Superbike team. And we were talking about the size of the engine, because that has a very narrow angle. The RSV Aprilia has a very narrow angle engine, I think 65 degrees. And it causes some problems because it's so narrow, the V angle, all the inlet stuff is sticking up very high. So the airbox is quite small. And I was saying to Gigi, and I just remember his hand movements. He's going, I can move the engine wherever I want, you know, and that was the thing that mattered more than anything else. The engine was small, so he could move it around in the chassis and find the correct mix. Because what matters is you need to be able to have the center of gravity where you want it, and you need to have the output shaft, the front sprocket, where you want it. And sometimes that's quite tricky. For a long time for Ducati, that was the problem. They couldn't, the way their engine was designed, you could have the center of gravity correct, or you could have the swing arm pivot correct, or the front sprocket correct, but you couldn't get both. And when Gigi turned up and the new engine was built, one of the things he did was make it small enough that he could move it around in the chassis. The second thing he did to make it small, Ducati had already worked out that having a flywheel on the outside of the bike, and it started off, it was just the alternator rotor. This goes back to the days of Rossi. They were putting more and more weight into the alternator to try and slow down the throttle reaction, because Rossi wanted, I mean, on motorcycles, the initial throttle opening from nothing up to whatever throttle opening down the straight, that initial touch when you're leaned right over, and the accuracy of the throttle and the gentleness of the throttle matters far more than whether you make 250 or 300 horsepower. Because unless you can come off full lean gently and you use the throttle to bring the bike upright, unless you can do that, you're toast. So by putting a bigger flywheel on, they could slow down the throttle reaction. And what he did when he built the new bike, instead of having an alternator generator, he put a flywheel on the side of the bike like an old Moto Guzzi Falcone, like the old 500 Moto Guzzis. Big, they used to call it a bacon slicer. And the modern Ducati race bike has a bacon slicer. Only when it was back in the day, in the 50s with the Moto Guzzis, it was doing maximum 4,500, 5,000 RPM. This thing's doing 18 or 20,000 RPM. And it's 100 millimeters in front of the rider's big toe. And it's out in the open. It's amazing. But
on which side of the bike?
It's on the left side of the bike. It's an amazing thing, because when you look at the rule book, you seal the engine at the start of the year. You can't change anything, but you can change things on the outside. So what he's done by putting this flywheel on the outside, he can make it lighter because you can put a much bigger diameter on the thing. I reckon it's 200 millimeters diameter. You know, this is not a small flywheel. And because it generates so much inertia because of its size, it doesn't have to be that heavy. Whereas if you had it inside the engine, you can't make it the diameter bigger, so you have to make it heavier.
Wait.
and you haven't had to put lots of metal around the crankshaft, a big crankshaft. It's a small crankshaft. So he can move the engine around, and he's got his flywheel, and at every single racetrack, he can choose to have a different flywheel.
Wow, Neil, it's incredible. I had no idea of
whole
that.
technology that only Ducati have. And if Honda use their new concessions correctly, they will do the same. It is such a brilliant idea. I'm sure they won't want to for it to be seen, or for them to follow somebody else's lead. But blimey, it is a good idea.
And since when are they using this technology or GG?
Basically, the new engine came, I think, in 2014.
14, yes, first engines.
Have been slowly building up ever since. So I've seen about 3 or 4 different shapes of flywheel. They started off just being like an alternator, so a cup on the side of the engine. Now it's just a big dish. I'm sure there's some pictures around it, and it's not perfectly round anymore. They're also using it to balance the engine, because a V4, although it is balanced in many ways, it still wants to rock slightly. So if you had a weight outside one side, you'd be using that to balance it out if you could, and I think they are.
Wow, I am, how do you say, with my mouth open listening to this.
There's one more layer, which I'm fairly sure they're doing. One of the issues when you have lots of inertia in an engine, you've made it really slow to pick up. It makes it incredibly slow. It's incredibly difficult to slow down. When you hit the brakes, you're not only trying to stop the motorcycle, you're trying to stop the flywheel on the engine. Now,
something that is pushing.
I have one of these old Moto Guzzis, and it's a 1953 motorcycle. It's a Falcone 500. The brakes are not good. You do need to be thinking a long way ahead. But it's amazing how much better the brakes work if you pull the clutch in as well. And you take the engine out of the loop. And you think, okay, if I'm doing this, they must be doing this. And I'm fairly sure that if they're not putting the clutch in going into corners, I think they could also possibly be doing something to slow the crankshaft down, because as much as that is controlling acceleration, they need to find something else to control deceleration. So I think they've got a brake on it.
Interesting.
I tell you what, I really would quite like half an hour in the Ducati garage with nobody else around.
with Tardozzi in the toilet, for example.
Tied up.
We can kidnap Tardozzi for a while.
Yeah. I think he'd have a lot of competition.
And Neil, is the Ducati so much in front of the rest, or is one of the keys the 8 bikes on the grid?
It's not hurting. But I see enough detail in it to make me the bike itself. I mean, 8 bikes is quite an important thing for Ducati, because we used to go to a test, and quite often in the test, the Ducati on the Monday would be faster than it was on the Sunday. So even back 10 years ago, they had a bike that was capable of going quicker than it was on race day, but it took too long to find all the correct settings. If they had an extra day, they found some more settings. 8 bikes means that you can try 3 or 4 different settings and then put them on the bike in the first place. So the complexity probably needs 8 bikes to get everything correct on race day. But that's what they've done. They've achieved the aim.
Very nice. And Neil, on the other side of the scale, we see a Honda. I know that you have, while you were in the paddock, you were pretty close to Honda. You had big relationship with the Honda people. How do you explain what happened with Honda?
The Honda of 2019 and of 2020, early 2020 was perfect. If you look at the laps Marquez did at Jerez before he crashed, it is the same as setting a 100-meter world record on a crowded railway station platform. Yes, he went through the field while breaking the absolute lap record. But the trouble was, it was the perfect bike for one man, for Marquez only. And I can easily understand their engineers' desire to see how far they could go. And it wasn't that it was a bad bike. It was just a perfect bike, but you had to be a perfect rider to make it deliver what it could do. I mean, Cal Crutchlow used to say, look, I see Marquez's data. It's not a question of how is he doing this. I just know I cannot do that. And that was the skill. So I can understand why they went where they went. And, you know, in the end, if they're winning the races, nobody at the top of Honda is going to say, well, where's bikes numbers 2, 3, and 4? All that really matters is they've won the championship again.
Correct.
But the second Marquez wasn't there, they were in big trouble.
Yes.
Yeah, because they've got a bike. They've chased the dragon. They've gone all the way down the path to the ultimate bike for the one man, and the one man's not there anymore. So suddenly you have to start making a new bike. I don't know. I wasn't there, so I don't know precisely what they did. I can say that whatever they did was the wrong direction. It's quite clear. And what's more clear is the Marquez that has come back cannot deal with this new direction.
Correct.
And I have to assume that whatever they changed at some point in the last 3 years, they must have put him on his old motorcycle at some point. It's either in the spares box or it's in the museum, but you wouldn't not try it. And even then it didn't work. So yes, they got lost. Now the question is what they're going to do about it. Now, with this new rule for concessions, they have the opportunity to do some experimentation.
Exactly. Any bike. They can do any bike they want.
Yes, I don't think they'll change from V4. That's Honda's preferred. Yeah. You know, they've been doing that for 30, 40 years. And there's good reasons to do that. It works with the tires. The Ducati one is not wrong. If I was them, I have to say I'd seriously consider a big flywheel on the outside. It's clearly working. Or I'd find some way of making my throttle reaction adjustable. But they need time, and I think they've got rid of all the people who were there in the last few years. They're starting again. So my basic question is, who are they bringing in? And there's two groups of people I can think of. I've heard a rumor that they're talking about a bunch of guys from Formula One, probably for the same reason that the Ferrari guys available. There's a cost cap and everything else. But I don't, I hate to say this, while I admire what Formula One does, motorcycling is not Formula One.
Exactly. We have seen it several times.
Yeah, absolutely. And the next thing is, why does Honda race? Honda races to train its engineers. They would much rather they got a racing project wrong than the new Civic or the new VTR 500 or what motorcycle. The training program is the race program. So whoever starts with this bike, you're going to have an awful lot of new engineers. So I do think we will see new ideas. And I do think we will also see ideas that won't work, but they will want to try them. They will want their engineers to see what happened when they followed their word and it didn't work. So I think it could take 1 or 2 years for the Honda to really deliver. But I also think it will deliver. It's their way. They have a point to prove now.
And Neil, can Yamaha's situation be compared with Honda's or not?
They're in the same trouble, but the Yamaha engine has had a lot of its advantages taken away. Back 10 years ago, Yamaha was pretty much the only engine that had a crankshaft rotating backwards. When you have an engine turning backwards, allied to the wheels, the bike can turn differently. Essentially, you're talking about gyroscopes. And if you've been to physics class and you've held a front wheel of a push bike in your hands and got somebody to spin it and then you turn it, you find it does things you don't expect it to do. And a motorcycle is full of gyroscopes. it's got camshafts, it's got gearbox shafts, but critically, it's got a crankshaft and wheels, which are very big gyroscopes. So when you start spinning everything a lot and spinning very high revs, it does not want to turn. And what's happened is we got control electronics about 8 years ago that took away all the sophisticated electronics that meant you could run a light crankshaft. So now some of the street bikes I see, they have extremely light crankshafts, but they've got very big computers that helps you control that. That doesn't exist in MotoGP anymore. So to control the crankshaft, they had to increase the weight to get the inertia. And by increasing the weight, they had a bigger gyroscope, so the bike didn't want to turn. And Yamaha, who'd always had this reverse rotating crankshaft, and probably quite a heavy one, always had bigger sweeping lines through the corners, because that's what one of the effects of this crankshaft is. But also, rotating backwards, it would hold the back down a little bit, coming into corners, and coming out of corners, it would hold the front down a bit. So they just rode in a different way. Now everybody does that. They've all had to reverse the crankshafts because they haven't got the electronics. So everybody's now in Yamaha's way in the corners. And where the Yamaha could use this different line to keep its speed up and make up for the fact that making an inline 4 work like a V4 cost a bit of power, they can't do that anymore. They're the only people with an inline 4. To make this crossplane work, you lose a couple of horsepower. And now you have a bunch of other bikes in your way in the corner. So they've got to get away first, but they haven't got the power. So I think Yamaha's actually got quite a big problem. That's not to say it can't be solved. They've also got an absolutely brilliant rider, and that can make a difference. But you go back to the old world. I can remember Jorge Lorenzo 8-9 years ago at Mugello, regularly winning at Mugello, and he was winning by 15 seconds or something like that. But then you looked at the top speed chart and he's down in 17th or 18th place.
Correct. Yes.
So one place on the straight where they checked the speed, he was slow. But the beautiful thing with the Yamaha then was everywhere else on the racetrack, it was fast. And now everybody's in its way. So it's a slightly more complex thing. If they built a V4, you could make a bit more power. But Suzuki wasn't so slow. So exactly. Suzuki knew something that Yamaha didn't. And it's a question now of how much of that, I suspect it was a combustion chamber shape or something. If I was at Yamaha, I'd be quietly phoning up my friend in Suzuki saying, can we have a chat?
I invite you for dinner.
Yes. Would you like a holiday somewhere nice?
Okay, and Neil, to finish the bikes, the KTM, it started like a Honda, and he's clearly turned into a Ducati, and it's not only, even in the garage now, it's Italian spoken. Before it was German.
They've hired an awful lot of people from Ducati. It's what you would do if somebody's winning and you're not, and you're prepared to spend the money, you go and find some guys who know how to create the magic. Then you've got to work out how quickly you can create the magic. One of the things about the Ducati is this external flywheel. I would like to see what KTM, I think, have had a year now with the Italians.
Yeah, now they are full Italian. In the garage, Neil, there is only Italian spoken, only Italian. Then
let's wait and see what their engine looks like next year, because it's a big project to redesign the castings. But I'm so convinced that an external flywheel makes a difference. Let's just see what pops up on the side of the KTM.
All right, let me ask you the last question. Oh no, the second last. If you were the head of Ducati Corse, would you have hired Marc Marquez or not?
Very difficult question. Marc is a genius. Is he what? Do I want to be seen as taking someone where the rider has won or my bike has won? in the end, racing is about selling motorcycles. So most people want their machine to be seen to be the one that matters. And Ducati has done that. Mark can turn up. I'm sure he will improve the show. I think this next year, unless something amazing happens, is going to be Jorge Martin, Bagnaia, and Marquez. But would I slow him down? Well, we saw Jorge Martin not able to accelerate as quick as Bagnaia off the last corner at Valencia. That appears to be as much a technical thing as a rider thing. The ride height device on Bagnaia's bike, I am told, I've not been there to check, is slightly more advanced and lets the bike get a little bit lower. Simple laws of physics, that says it can accelerate harder if everything else is perfect. Would you give that to Mark? Difficult. I think he's capable of making up the difference in a lot of ways. But equally, it's a test of Mark. The Marc Marquez that's here now, you think of the operations he's had, the crashes he's had since his last championship. He cannot be the same. It's not the human way to be able to switch that off. Each piece has a little bit of an effect on him. Now, would I want him there? I think I'd be much happier if I had not been asked the question.
Look, I tell you something. Domenicali didn't want Marquez in Ducati. Chavati didn't want Marquez in Ducati, and they said it public. It's written everywhere. Da Linea, Gigi. I can imagine that Gigi wanted to know where his bike can reach, because
how can I put it? I'm sure Gigi would be sitting there thinking,
because Neil, Bagnaia doesn't know any bike but the Ducati. Martin doesn't know any bike but the Ducati. So they basically are used to. Gigi, I am sure that he wants to see what a rider, and it's not just a rider, coming from another brand, is capable to push his bike to.
Yes, but the mistake would be to do what Honda did and chase it and to build a bike for Marquez. You need to keep what they're doing. You mustn't change the current formula. The current formula was we build a bike, we progress, the works team have the latest stuff. And if you've got Marquez getting in the way, you have to decide if you want to slow him down or not. Now, that is a difficult question. It is quite common for the private teams who have old works machinery to have a few less RPMs. Back in the days of Tech 3, the number 2 rider in Tech 3 would typically have one less engine in a year.
True, yes.
It's a way of cutting costs and also quietly making sure the works team won. With Mark, it's going to be a little bit more difficult because I suspect he's capable of making up for a lot. And I also suspect that we may not hear it from Mark, but we would find out somehow if he is being deliberately slowed down. The different people tell people things in different ways.
Yeah, and another thing is, look, the other day I did an interview with Paul Espargaro, and I asked him, what did you learn being in the same garage than Marc Marquez? He said, to be competitive. And then he said, you cannot imagine to which level he pushes competitiveness, no? You say. Yeah. He said, even between the different crews in the garage, he said, you cannot imagine. Look, let me finish. He said, in one race in Qatar, I finished in front of him. That was when he did 3rd or something like this, and Mark did 5th. And he said, from that moment on, the war was on. So you can imagine what he's going to do in Ducati. The same, Neil, the same.
No, absolutely. But this is not just Mark. This is the Repsol Honda way. And it's also the way of most very competitive team managers. There was a quote in a book about Wayne Rainey. Michael Scott wrote a book about Wayne Rainey just after he was injured. I think he went and stayed with him for a couple of months and wrote his biography. It's well worth reading if you want to understand.
I have read it, yes.
And he said, the first thing you must do is beat your teammate. They are not mates. They are there to compete against each other. And you want, Olivia Super, you say, you want a number 2 rider who will push number 1. So as a rule, the last thing you want sitting in the number 2 seat is someone who's good friends with the number 1 seat person. You want someone who's his worst enemy. And then you have your entire teams start racing each other and it becomes personal. And that's the only way to push development forward. And you may say, we don't allow people to compare data. But in the end, there'll be a truck at the back of the garage that compares data. Because that's the only way to get everybody forward.
It's interesting because I asked Paul if the Japanese promoted this kind of relationship between the Japanese, between the 2 riders. And he said to me, just look back. There were times when there was a wall in the middle of the garage, You
even look at the layout of the garage. Both teams have both sides of the garage have their backs to each other. Yeah, and I'm sure it's deliberate. And if you speak to a number 1 rider, he would much rather have a friend in the number 2 seat. But for a team, that's the biggest mistake you can make. You have got to beat your teammate. And if he beats you just once, it has to be personal.
It went personal in that garage, yes.
Yeah. And this is competition. This is competition that you don't normally see in our day-to-day lives. And it's competition laid raw.
Look, because and Paul was pretty honest, and he said to me, look, I don't blame Mark for being like this, but he just showed me that there is another level.
Sure. But can you imagine both of the Espargaro brothers being in the same garage? It's personal, even between them. Who's the best, who's the fastest.
We will see this Ingressini team next season.
Well, I hate to say it. I feel, yes, it is going to be a very interesting year.
Neil, you almost said it. I feel sorry for Alex. You almost said it.
I'm not to say it, but I do feel sorry for Alex. What I still have to find out is what happened to Jorge Martin. With all the electronics we've got and everything else, how did a bike spin a wheel on the line in Malaysia? Something's not right.
In Qatar, no?
Qatar, sorry, yes. Something's not right there. I don't know what it is. That's nobody else has done. I mean, I understand the physics as to why the bike would want to spin the tire. We've lowered the bikes, so now they don't pitch over backwards as much, so you don't have so much grip, and you are feeding through more power. So it's going to want to do that, but nobody else's bike did it. Only
yeah, there were 121 bikes on the grid.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh yeah, Neil, to finish, will the concession give the Japanese the air they need to come back? What do you think?
I think so. I actually think 2025 could see one or the other of the 2 Japanese factories at the top. It's more a question of which one's got the money to spend.
Exactly.
I'm a little bit worried that Yamaha will decide not to spend the money, but they will not. They will want to compete. It's just a question of now how much they can spend. This Group D of the concessions that they are both in gives you more freedom to test than anybody has had for 15 years. You have to go back to the 990s to be able to do this amount of testing. I think that it makes me smile a bit because Ducati have been badly restricted on the number of tires. And knowing how Ducati thinks, I do think that by the end of the year, the fastest motorcycle on worn-out tires will be a Ducati. They will just test on worn-out tires. They're not going to stop testing.
Neil, it has been like always. Our chats have always been a pleasure. Now it's on video. In the past, it was in the press room.
Well,
Thank
this is
you
a
very
lot
much.
less painful than trying to write it all out.
Neil, thanks a lot.
No problem.
Appreciate very much. And what can
Look
I
after
say?
yourself. Have a great Christmas, and we'll speak again soon.
Okay, bye.
Cheers. Cheers.